Welcome everybody, and a very warm welcome to our guests tonight on behalf of the Central Library, on behalf of Writers Unlimited and Meulenhof Publishing. We are very happy to have Jens Christian Grøndahl here, one of the most important Danish authors of our modern times. So it's really a huge privilege to have him here, and you're the happy few that can see him, meet him in live here. And we have Gustaaf Peek, Jens Christian Grøndahl. The translation of his latest book has just come out. It's called Portret van een man, Portrait of a Man. And the translator is also present here tonight, and you'll meet her later. She'll read a passage of the translation. And then we have Gustaaf Peek, who also, you can't miss him lately. His latest book, Godin, Goddess Hero, has been reviewed very positively. He's been nominated for the Libris Prize, and he's going to have a conversation with Jens Christian Grøndahl tonight. And I hope you will have, I'm sure you'll have a wonderful evening. And I'll give the floor to the two gentlemen here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you. So, good evening, Jens.
Good evening.
Good to have you here. Good to have you here. I've did some research. You were born in 1959, is that correct?
It's true.
And you published your first novel in 1985. And I hope I pronounced this correctly, Kvinden in Mitten.
That's true.
That's true. So you've been an author now, a published author, for 30 years. Mm-hmm. So in a few moments we're going to talk about your new novel. In Dutch it's called Portret van een man, Portrait of a Man. But I was wondering, being a published author for so long, finding some success. Your latest book is about dreams, about illusions, about times past. When you started out as a writer more than 30 years ago, had you envisioned this life you lead right now as a writer?
Well, I couldn't really know it because when you start out as a young writer, you start out with the urge to write and to publish, but you don't really know what you're doing. So there were writers I admired, and apart from the writing itself, I was dreaming of becoming such a writer that would become invited to such a place like this and become interviewed by a colleague. But it was all something very remote, and of course I couldn't know what it would be like in beforehand. The thing is that when you begin to write, you come into literature with such a huge respect for the writers who came before you, the old masters whom you admire, and some of them you might even get to meet as a young writer. And in the beginning, you ask yourself, how am I to become accepted? How am I to gain access to this huge, wonderful building? Am I allowed in?
So now, 30 years on, do you feel that you are accepted, that you have attained a level, the level of the old masters, or are you?
No, I feel something else actually, because the thing I discovered was that it's not a question of measuring yourself with what you believe to be, the impossible heights of old masters. It's to do with finding a language for that which is your experience. And what you discover as you go along is that this is what every generation of writers did. The old masters didn't know they would be masters when they started to write, but they did the same thing as you tried to do. They tried to find the language to express what it felt like to be a person alive at a given historical moment. And you don't do that by trying to write literature the way you think it should be written. This is what you start out wanting to write literature the way you think it should look like. And perhaps you will start, imitating writers you admire. Actually, Marcel Proust once gave this piece of advice to young writers: write pastiche. Try to imitate writers you admire. You will fail. And the moment you fail, that is when you begin to discover your own voice.
So is a writer composed of his shortcomings? Is that?
I think that's a nice way of putting it, actually. You are your shortcomings. You are not your mastery, but you are the limited person you can be. And for me, writing has been a question of discovering the writer I could be. And that has a lot to do with your shortcomings. It has a lot to do with the limitations, which are your perspective, your outlook on things, being the person you are, being born, the place, and at the time that is yours. And it's a question of making the most of that, trying to be at eye level with your times and with what you've been through, what is your background, what is your experience.
But right now you're on a book tour. You have a new novel out. Do you? I have many discussions with friends and colleagues about this issue. The idea of the distinction between the writer and the author. The writer sits behind his desk and he writes his work, and then he goes out in the world to promote his work, and suddenly he is an author.
True. Yes.
But how do you keep it sane? How do you keep it level?
This is something I couldn't know before when I published my first book. I couldn't know that there would be this divide that you are referring to, the divide between the writer in his solitude writing his books and the author who goes into the public and participates in public events, and who might even achieve a certain degree of success or being known, etc. And what I've felt was that the distance between those two functions became more and more pronounced. Meaning that I really had to protect that isolation, and in a way, a certain degree of innocence, because there's a degree of innocence to sitting down at your desk every day and writing fiction. I mean, all your friends have important jobs or do something meaningful out there in society, and you grow older and older while you're still just writing, fantasies, things you imagine. It has nothing to do with proper work. So in the eyes of the public, there's a degree of ambivalence, because on the one hand you can be lucky enough to become accepted and well known and well respected even, and at the same time there's something slightly marginalized or even ridiculous about the writer compared to people who see themselves as important, figures in society. But for me, it was always important to protect the difference between the writer and the author, and the public figure that you become and the writer you've always been, who is somebody who innocently dives into his imagination time and again.
Because I kept thinking about this issue when I read the book. It's about a man who's 60 years old, and he's looking back on his life, and what does he see? Well, I encountered disillusion, I encountered regret, I encountered so I'm thinking you're born in 1959, so that makes you round about 55. Around about that age that a man starts reminiscing, starts looking back, and I was thinking, is it a novel is both autobiographical and it's severely not autobiographical, but I thought, what is there some personal disillusionment seeping into the text, or is that a coincidence?
I think there's no way to grow older without becoming disillusioned in so many ways. It's part of growing older that you see through perceptions and illusions that you held at an earlier age. But for me, becoming disillusioned is not always a sad thing. There's also a sense of relief in ridding yourself of perceptions which prove to be false. I think there's hope in that, actually. So disillusionment is not only negative, it's also a question of perhaps even a growing degree of maturity. And that being said, I'd also say that looking back on my books, it's more to do with seeing them as reflections of stages in my own life. Because I agree that there's always some connection. Many writers will tell you that, no, my novel has nothing to do with my life. Yeah. And when we say that, we say it, I'm sure you said it as well, but it's because we want to protect the book.
Sure.
We don't want people to read the book in order to know about the author. We want them to read the book in order to know about themselves. And the meaning of books is not to tell the truth about the writer, it's to talk about something we share as human beings. So obviously there's no direct autobiographical connection, but at the same time there's always a hidden connection. I wouldn't write if it wasn't a way to contemplate my own experiences and to try to come to terms with them, to try to understand them, which is an ongoing process. And the wonderful thing with fiction is that it allows you to approach that which would be too awkward, too embarrassing to approach in a straightforward, autobiographical manner.
Does it make this dynamic? Does it make the writer of fiction a better human being?
No. I think in many ways you're worse than other people because you have this horrible tendency to distance yourself, to watch life at a distance, which can be a terrible thing because, at least my experience has been from early on, from when I was a child, that I always felt that there was this gap between myself and my surroundings, and that was the space in which I was just looking at things, looking at the world, looking at the others, watching them. And that's where every writer begins, I think, with this feeling of isolation and this wish to simply watch life while others participate. Thomas Mann describes this wonderfully in his short novel, Tonio Kröger, which is about another young poet who has this problem that he has this tendency to watch life rather than participate. And he dreams of participating. And the irony of writing is that it's a way of exploring your solitude, but writing is also a way to overcome it, because when you publish what you write, you share it, and you finally discover that it is possible to overcome that distance.
So did you overcome that distance?
I felt I overcame it in my own life, partly because I was lucky enough to have a family life throughout all these years and to have children and see them grow while I was writing my books at the same time. And I know you're a father as well,
yes,
so you know what it means to divide your life between the loneliness of the writing and the need to isolate yourself in your imagination, but also the grace of being sort of called out of that loneliness because somebody needs you.
Kids make life more real.
Exactly.
If that's the exact phrase.
The crucial moment is when they begin to read you.
Oh my God. Well, she's allowed to read some.
It's a little early for your daughter.
It's a little bit early. Maybe I should give a short summary of your new novel, Portret van een man, Portrait of a Man, because it just came out. It's about a nameless narrator, and he recounts the life choices he has made, the path he has taken, and he tries to look for meaning. He questions how the women in his life have shaped his past. existential issues. What is existence? What part do memories play? To me, it was a melancholy rumination on lost time. You know, Proust, he's already out there. You mentioned him, and it was to me it was a very melancholy tale. It's a man looking back, and what he sees isn't the most uplifting of pasts. But the story is told from his boyhood until his 60th birthday, and he starts out as a boy with ideals, with hopes, with dreams. You have him start out as a Marxist. You know,
True. He starts out. Well, the novel begins when he is 17 years old, and so this is the beginning of the 70s, a time when a lot of young people took part in this radicalization of politics and the ideals of dreaming of a totally different way of living together, a different society. Yeah. That was really the energy of the political movements on the new left in the 70s. So he's part of that. But I think what he discovers is that what drives him is not so much the utopia of a different society. It's rather to do with the desire for life to be richer, more colorful, more intense, the desire to feel that you are present here and now in life. Because when he watches his parents, what he sees is a more or less petit bourgeois existence. Yes. And this is the rebellion of any young person at any time. Any young person who reaches adolescence will feel the same urge. At that time, this urge was expressing itself through politics. And he's someone who is born in a working class family who has risen in society, because these are the 70s. This was the time when the welfare society in Denmark was really developing, and more people who had their origins in the working classes would gain access to a middle class life. So his family is part of that phenomenon, that development in our society. And what he sees is that suddenly this wonderful society, which has accomplished so much in terms of material welfare, in terms of progress, in terms of equality, suddenly he sees how it lacks something. It lacks spirituality. And he finds that somewhere where he didn't look for it in the beginning. What happens in the first part is that in high school he has a new German teacher, and she happens to be a woman who has fled East Germany together with her daughter. And so she's been she's seen the other side of Marxism, so she has no illusions about it, of course. And she cures him of his ideological obsession and introduces him to the great German classics. So that's where he finds what he's looking for the first time. Reading Rilke, listening to Brahms, yes. He feels he doesn't see high culture in a snobbish way. What he sees, what he finds, is a language for that in life which has to do with the spiritual. And he finds intensity, he finds color, he finds what he's looking for. And he also finds love, because his teacher's daughter becomes his first romantic passion, if you like.
Yes, because he at that time when he comes under the spell of his German teacher, Godin, he has a relationship with a girl with the most beautiful pair of breasts. Apparently, but why? It is called Portrait of a Man, but is it also a portrait of men, of Danish men in general? How
I don't think you could.
How universal is the story?
I think that universalism in a novel works differently than in other contexts, because I would never set out with the ambition to write about the average Danish man, or to give a portrait of all Danish men. And that would be a ridiculous ambition. What I want to do is to write about this man.
Yeah.
And what my hope is that in writing about this man, I will perhaps be able to describe something that can be recognized by others, but not in the sense that this is typical of Danish men, because in many ways he's not. In many ways he's quite an original, and luckily I'd say he's not your average Danish man.
Why didn't you give him a name?
I didn't give him a name because the narration is the story is based in his interior. And it's told in the first person, and this is something I've done before. When I write a first-person narrative, I never get around to giving the main character a name, because when you speak of yourself, you don't mention your name. In a way, not giving him a name. Of course, I could have given him a name, but not doing it is really a way of stressing how this is not seen from the outside, how this is a story told from the inside. It's about the inner life of this man, and that's why he never has a name.
It's a good choice. It's a good choice. It is. So just let me mention, there is room for questions. There is a microphone. So if sometimes I look up, and then there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Just raise your hand. The microphone will find you. As you have noticed, he will answer to anything. And so now we have to talk about the women, because I tried to count them. He's very popular with women. Do
you think so?
Yeah, it's what I wrote.
I'm not sure if you would agree.
Down. He's seduced more than he seduces himself.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. Why is that?
You mean he's seduced more than he seduces himself?
Yeah.
Yes, he's someone who is. He has an inclination to be rather introverted as a person.
Yes.
So he's actually surprised, I think, every time a woman shows an interest in him.
He is.
And he also finds a way of escaping this isolation, this mental isolation, which is his basic mode, by way of giving himself away in passion, in desire, in the urge to connect with a woman.
Well, I was quite jealous of him. I admit I used to be an introverted kid, and I was kind of cute, but I wasn't that popular with girls. So I was kind of surprised that quite a few attractive girls and women were attracted to him. But what is it? Because your main character feels quite detached. He feels not all there. Do you believe that is something that makes him stand out, that makes him attractive, that makes him someone special?
He wouldn't know that himself. He would be surprised if he was told so. But I think it's probably true that the fact that he's never quite there makes him slightly mysterious in the eyes of these women. Yeah. The fact that he's always also somewhere else in his mind. Yeah. But it's also his problem. Yeah. It's what he's trying to escape. He's someone who is keenly aware of the fact that he's not fully committed to the here and now of life.
Would you call him lonely?
Yes, I'd say that he is lonely, but he doesn't suffer from his loneliness. Only with time does he discover that there is there's a degree of pain to this loneliness, because it's so much a part of who he is, to be on his own, in his mind, in his thoughts, at a distance from reality, from the others, while at the same time dreaming of being able to take part, just like Tonio Kröger, who is quoted in the book.
He has dreams, but he's not the most energetic. He's not the most ambitious of men.
No, he's strangely unambitious in a way. But that also has to do with what happens to him, because when he's young, and after his first passion for this East German girl comes to nothing, and he's disillusioned for the first time, he starts studying philosophy like she does. But then one of these stories with women ends in an almost fatal way that somehow disturbs his development and throws him into a crisis, at the end of which he discovers that he's lost his ambition to pursue an academic career. And he discovers that he wants to become a school teacher, which is a job that in many ways is contrary to the level of ambition that is today, what you expect from successful people. I mean, to be a school teacher is to be somebody who, watches these kids pass, on their way to adulthood, and he finds peace in that. He loves the notion that he is someone who will follow these kids into adulthood and leave them and start all over again with a new bunch of kids. Yeah, and he likes that.
It's in this country anyway. Schools are trying very hard to look for new teachers, but almost everyone seems to want to do something else. More corporate stuff. Now let's talk about art and culture. I feel he tries to connect with women. He thinks that they will save him or uplift him, but in the end, what I believe is culture, art, that's what keeps him whole, sane, alive.
It is true that it is in his relationship with culture and art and music, it is there that he stays alive. Mentally, spiritually. That's where he finds spiritual fulfillment. So in a way, that is what makes him not come apart. But at the same time, it is also what makes him lonely, because increasingly he finds that this is something that he cannot really share. The irony of his story is that he falls in love with high culture at the time when high culture begins to fade away as something important in society.
Isn't it also the dynamic that art helps you dream, and suddenly you start to dream and reality seems like a disappointing contender?
Yes, I suppose that's part of it as well. Certainly,
but is it? Writers are always obsessed about the idea, no, I don't write novels with a message, but I got this feeling that there was some message about art and culture and about the beneficial qualities of art and culture. Are you?
There's an observation that in the novel that literature and music and art in general is a mental space where we grow as human beings. And without it, we become smaller than we have to be. And I think this is his basic assumption and his basic experience as a person with this very intense relationship with art. And what he sees is that in the society around him, the society that develops from when he's a young man until he's approaching 60, in that society, which is ours today, that understanding of what art has to offer is on the wane. It's fading.
Yeah.
It's ironical because on the one hand, we consume culture like never before, and culture
True.
is accessible as part of our consumer goods. But having a profoundly spiritual relationship with art is becoming more and more difficult in a society obsessed with material welfare, with success, with criteria of what a successful life means that are contrary to the contemplation that is a prerequisite for being able to really enter that mental space.
But isn't that I would almost say, isn't that an eternal concern? The Romans already were obsessed with the idea, oh no, it's all sliding downhill.
It's true, and he makes that observation in the end because he doesn't want to become a grumpy old man lamenting the decline of culture.
Yeah.
He's not a pessimist.
No,
not really. He's a melancholy person, but he's not a pessimist because he what I think his notion is, I think he shares that notion with myself that everything has its time. And high culture, as we've known it, had its time as well, and it's in the process of becoming something else. We don't know it yet, and perhaps it will be for much younger people to redefine what culture really means. So personally, I'm quite hopeful. I just observed that the cultural world where I grew up and where I was just old enough, I've been just old enough to experience that is a world which is dissipating now.
Well, with every new generation of artists, whether they be writers or painters or musicians, I always feel that the spark to enter such life is reached through an epiphany, an artistic epiphany. Yeah. You've read something, you've seen something, and that sparks something in you. Yes. And that is always fickle. That cannot be predicted. No. But as we are surrounded by culture, so I have this hope that the chance that all this culture, all these performances and plays and CDs and books have have a higher chance to spark something in someone.
I agree, and I think our friend here, my narrator, would agree as well. Yeah. That every now and then, some kid will discover poetry, literature, painting, and this will change his life. It happened to himself. It will happen again, and every time it happens, culture survives. Culture transforms itself and becomes something new. That's the wonderful thing that we cannot know in advance how this will happen, but we know it will.
Like I said, you cannot predict it. So sometimes, as a human being, you just have to go and wait, and that's always hard. That's always hard. So, are there any questions right now? Yes, over there.
No, I don't want that.
Yeah, but then it's other people can hear it.
Okay. So, when you're a novelist, you have an idea when you write of a character, of something that you want to get across as a message. But there's also a technical ability in terms of writing, such as some artists almost paint with their words, or they can be described that way. Do you feel that you have accomplished this in the writing that you have done?
Yes, I feel that I found a way to portray my characters in the manner that I need in order to express the kind of experiences that are important to me to find a way to express, to describe. And this is something that develops over time. I mean, it takes several books before you begin to find a way of going about it, because a novel can be so many things. There are so many approaches to the novel as an art form. I mean, and there are no rules, really. My first problem was that I started out writing poetry. And poetry is about concentration. And when I started my first novel, the first problem was, how do you make a novel last? I mean, how do you make how do you tell a story in a way that will make it longer than just a few pages? Because a story can be told on the back of an envelope. So how do you make it sort of fill out the format of a book? And I discovered that it had to do with seeing how it's not just a question of the distance between A and B. There's a world between A and B. And that was the world that I began to explore. In a direct sense, for instance, by way of descriptions, how does a person enter a room? What does that look like? What does it mean to enter a room? What does it mean to enter a story? And where do you begin? And how does one sentence follow the other? That's something that you practice over the years. And doing that, you discover that or you invent your own rules. You invent your own version of the novel as an art form. And for me, it had a lot to do with the inner voice of a character and the way a character discovers him or herself by way of looking at the world. So it's the relationship between the self and the surroundings that has been the driving force in much of my writing. So it's so much to do with this phenomenological approach that it's always about somebody who is relating to something outside himself and looking back on something that happened earlier and which is now a thing of the past. So it's in this field of tensions between now and the past, between the self and the others. That's where my stories find their dynamics. I don't know if this is really an answer to your question. Not really, I'm afraid.
If you were to compare yourself to 10 other Danish authors who wrote novels, what would differentiate you from them?
That's a difficult one, because I don't see myself as a Danish writer. I am a Danish writer, of course I am. I do belong to a tradition, but I've also been marked and inspired by writers who were not Danish, by French writers especially, and they were equally important. So, when I'm asked about my relationship with the tradition to which I belong, I always think of something that was said by a famous Danish painter who's completely unknown outside our country, but he said, all good art is national, and all national art is bad. And I think I know what he meant, and I think everybody knows what he meant when you think about it, because obviously, especially when we speak about literature, a writer's work is part of a tradition. It's grown out of that tradition because of language. But there's also the universalism of literature. There's also the ambition to describe something that can be understood by people who do not share your cultural context. And it happens by way of the deep loyalty to the individual, which I think is a basic characteristic of all novels. All novels that I know and which were worthwhile reading were works of art which were based on a deep loyalty to individual experience. And individual experience is not a question of something that can be reduced to the surroundings or to a specific cultural setting. Being an individual and discovering yourself as an individual is also a way of discovering the distance between the self and the culture in which you were born. There's always a degree of rebellion even on the part of the self against the culture that surrounds you. There's a feeling that my own culture cannot fully explore or account for who I am as a person. I am more than just a representative or just a member of this or that community. I think that is the basic humanism of literature. And that is why I wouldn't be able to really answer that question in terms of culture. But obviously, I am a Danish writer. I think that if I were to describe where I am different, I would have to begin with where I am like the others. And I would say that there is one quality in Danish and in Scandinavian, but especially in Danish literature, which has to do with intimacy. If you read Andersen, what strikes you is that there is the intimacy of little things, a way to explore the world, the universe even, by way of tiny, tiny things, little animals, little objects in a drawer, and that is typically Danish. And I think that we are all marked by that. We're all children of Andersen in the sense that we have this special care for the smallness of individual life, for the intimacy of your room and the window in that room through which you look at the world. Other writers have taken that up as well. A very important writer who was perhaps the father of the modern Danish novel, Herman Bang, was also a writer who described the world through the silent lives of people who lived in corners far away from the center of society. Often they were provincial existences, and he's also the kind of writer that we're all indebted to as Danish writers. Where I differ or where I am different is probably where I am also drawing on inspirations from French literature, for instance. There's an approach to the novel in French literature which has been extremely important to me, and which is probably what makes me rather different from many Danish writers at the moment, in that those writers will also focus very much on the interior of their characters, on the mental lives of the characters. Those are novels which are not very plot-driven, and mine are not very plot-driven either. And that would probably be an example of where I'm also different from many writers in my language.
Yeah, I was. They are. This book, anyway, is very analytical about existence, about relationships, and I was reminded of a writer like Patrick Modiano, who's always concerned with the past as a confusing dream. It's the past evokes more questions than answers. So is that a connection? Is that?
Modiano is a writer whom I've been reading for many years, and I'm glad that I discovered him when I had already found my own way to approach the novel, because otherwise he would have become
too strong an influence.
Too strong of an influence. But having developed my way of writing and my way of writing the novel of the mind,
yes,
it was an exciting experience to encounter his work, and to discover that here was a writer who did something similar.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to compare Modiano with a writer like Proust, because in many ways they are quite different, although they both deal with memory and the importance of memory as what really constitutes a personal identity. But on the level of style, they're obviously different, because Modiano writes this classical, seemingly simple prose, which is very elaborate actually, but his aim is to write in a very natural, simple way. Yes. Whereas Proust is all about elaborating, all about extending, all about, it's like a universe exploding.
Yes,
so it's aesthetically speaking, it's a completely different approach to the novel. But they're also different in their perception of memory, because in Proust, And this is what makes him a classical writer. In Proust, you still find the belief that the past can be rediscovered, that you can redeem what is lost through art.
But
that the work of art is what redeems what was lost in a way that makes it, that can actually contain it. And Modiano doesn't believe that, and I don't believe that. I don't believe that you can actually redeem the past. The past remains lost, and it remains inaccessible, and you can only try to, approach that which remains lost. So there's always mystery, there's always secrets which are never quite resolved. And you find that in Modiano, you find that in my work as well. So it's always an attempt at understanding that which will remain enigmatic, that which will retain its secrecy.
Is that the attraction of writing, to never get it?
I think it is. Yeah. I really think that why do you keep going? I think it's the notion that luckily you will never really reach the point where you know it all. It's become a postmodernist notion that there is no such a thing as real truth. I don't think that is the case. I think there is truth, but we cannot know it fully. It will always remain partly hidden, and that's the dynamics of writing for me. That truth is there, but you can only try. You can only get so far in terms of exploring it.
I think it's time to listen to some original work. So could I invite your Dutch translator, Femke Blekking-Muller, there she is, to read a passage from Portret van een Man. And after she's finished, I'm going to ask you to read the same passage in Danish.
Ben ik te verstaan zo? Door Maria's vragen, die vol vertrouwen, maar wel sturend waren, begon ik me af te vragen of ik iets achterhield. Ik overdreef bijna hoe aangetast Erika eruit had gezien. Ik zag het in Maria's blik. Een waakzame kwetsbaarheid op weg naar de 40, wat ze natuurlijk ook was. Ik begon haar te strelen en de dingen te doen waarvan ik wist dat ze die lekker vond. Ze kwam langzaam op gang. Het kostte tijd en vaardigheid om haar op te winden, maar ik wist wat daarvoor nodig was. Terwijl we de liefde bedreven, zwijgend, om Julie niet wakker te maken, keek ik van buitenaf naar ons. Een samengesmolten teken van ledematen dat op zichzelf geen betekenis had. Het was de samenhang die het betekenis gaf, wist ik. Ik wist het al heel lang, maar opeens zag ik ons al te scherp. Niet door de ogen van Erika, maar door mijn eigen ogen. De 18-jarige keek door de jaren heen naar Maria en de man die ik was geworden. Ik wist wat hij dacht. Hij vergeleek mijn lang houdbare blijdschap met zijn eigen rusteloze honger dat het leven anders, meer moest zijn. Iets groters dan de dag, de weg en het lichaam. Eén moment leek het of ik op de grond lag en mijn 35-jarige ik hoog boven me uit zag torenen. Onvast op een paar stelten die maar bleven groeien. Iedere dag voerden ze me verder weg van degene die ik was geweest. Ik had altijd gedacht dat mijn jonge ik, doordat ik samen was met Maria, van zijn stelte af was gekomen, om te leren lopen, stapje voor stapje, dag voor dag. Door mijn samenzijn met haar waren mijn al te hoog gespannen verwachtingen ten aanzien van een vurige nabijheid vervangen door een verliefdheid op wat wel nabij was. Alles in het bestaan wat wasbestendig is en alleen maar mooier wordt door dagelijks gebruik. Voor alles waren wij niet langer het middelpunt van ons eigen bestaan. En we leerden waardering te hebben voor de bevrijding die het geeft om je eigen behoeften opzij te zetten. We kwamen in de verleiding om onszelf te prijzen voor onze nieuwe rijpheid. Maar, rijp als we waren, deden we dat niet. In plaats daarvan namen we er genoegen mee onze armen om elkaar heen te slaan, terwijl we zwaaiden naar Julie, die wegwaggelde op haar eerste schoentjes. Als Maria's ouders in de stad waren en erop stonden om op de kleine te passen, zodat wij er even uit konden, zaten we in het restaurant te lachen om onze eigen bezorgdheid. We waren liever thuis gebleven om haar in bad te doen en spelend, lachend en neuriënd een avond zoals alle anderen door te brengen. Avonden die samensmolten tot een wazige zwerm. Je ontdekt het niet altijd meteen als er gaten zijn geslagen in je leven. Toen ik merkte dat er iets kouds was binnengeslopen, legde ik geen verband met Erika of ons weerzien. Je kunt niet voorspellen wanneer zoiets zichtbaar begint te worden. Het is net als schade aan je huis, door een verzakkende fundering of optrekkend vocht. Je hebt geen idee dat je een probleem hebt, totdat de schade zich zo ver heeft uitgebreid dat er scheuren in het stukwerk ontstaan. We hadden nooit ruzie gehad en daarom ligt het voor de hand het begin van mijn vertrek te dateren op die eerste keer.
So now the same passage in the original language, in Danish.
Marias tillidsfulde, men ledende spørgsmål fik mig til at spørge mig selv, om jeg holdt noget tilbage. Jeg kom næsten til at gøre for meget ud af, hvor hærget Erika havde set ud. Jeg mærkede det i Marias blik, en agtpågivende sårbarhed på vej mod de 40, som også hun jo var. Jeg gav mig til at kæle for hende og gøre de ting, jeg vidste, hun kunne lide. Hun var en langsom starter. Det krævede tid og sniller at tænde hende, men jeg vidste, hvad der skulle til. Mens vi elskede stumt for ikke at vække Julie, kom jeg til at se os selv udefra. Et sammenfiltret, i sig selv meningsløst tegn og lemmer. Det var sammenhængen, der gav det betydning. Jeg vidste det, havde vidst det længe, men kunne pludselig se os alt for skarpt. Ikke med Erikas øjne, men med mine egne. Det var den 18-årige, der så frem gennem årene på Maria og den mand, jeg var blevet. Jeg vidste, hvad han tænkte. Han sammenlignede min langtidsholdbare glæde med sin egen restløse sult efter, at livet skulle være andet og mere. Noget større end dagen, vejen og kroppen. Et øjeblik var det, som om jeg lå nede på jorden og så mit 35-årige jeg-rage usikkert omkring højt oppe på et par stylter, der voksede og voksede. Hver dag fjernede de mig længere væk fra den, jeg havde været. Sammen med Maria havde jeg ellers tænkt, at det var mit unge jeg, der var kommet ned fra stylterne for at lære at gå et skridt en dag ad gangen. Sammen med hende var mine overspændte forventninger om et mere glødende nærvær blevet afløst af en forelskelse i det nære. Alt det i tilværelsen, der tåler vask, og som kun bliver smukkere af daglig brug. Frem for alt var vi ikke længere midtpunkt i vores eget liv, og vi lærte at sætte pris på befrielsen ved at tilsidesætte vores egne behov. Vi var fristet til at rose os selv for vores nye modenhed, men tog os i det, modne som vi var. I stedet nøjedes vi med at holde om hinanden, mens vi vinkede til Julie, der stavrede afsted i sine første sko. Når Marias forældre kom til byen og insisterede på at passe den lille, så vi kunne gå ud, sad vi på restauranten og smilede af vores egen beklemthed. Vi ville hellere være blevet derhjemme og have badet, leget, ledet og nynnet os gennem endnu en aften som alle de andre, der fortonede sig i en diset sværm. Man opdager ikke altid med det samme, at der er slået skår i ens liv. Da jeg mærkede, at noget koldt var begyndt at pible ind, forbandt jeg det ikke med Erik eller vores gensyn. Det er ikke til at forudse, hvornår sådan noget begynder at vise sig. Det er som med skader på huset, sætninger i soklen eller optrængende fugt. Man aner ikke, at man har et problem, før skaden har bredt sig så meget, at pudsen slår revner. Vi havde aldrig skændtes, og derfor er det nærliggende at datere mit opbruds begyndelse til den første gang. Do you know that actually there's a hidden quotation of Proust in that passage, because he's describing himself or his younger self as, walking on stilts.
Stilts, yeah.
And that's something that appears on the very last pages of À la Recherche that he sees, because he's at this party at the Guermantes, and he sees all these people he's known when they were younger, and suddenly they're so old. Yeah. And he discovers that he himself is growing older. And he imagines that as we grow older, we are walking on stilts that are growing themselves. In the end, they will be high as church towers until we fall. Yeah. And it's a horrific description of what aging means and what time is, how time is something that actually alienates us and removes us from where we came from.
It's
we were.
It's one of the classical nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
You're high up and suddenly you're
yes.
falling. So it's wow.
Yes, true.
Proust, your main character is someone who reads. He listens to the right music. He brings his young daughter Julie to art galleries when she's young. But specifically, he's a reader. You know, he reads Mann, he reads Rilke, Stendhal. Why do you mention titles and books? Why is that?
I think it was an obvious thing to do because I wanted to write about this man who has this intense relationship with reading. And so these writers became a natural part of the narrative. And it was also a way of paying homage to the books that I love. So it was also a way of declaring my love and my admiration and my sense of being indebted to those great writers who have sort of paved the way and showed what literature can do.
It's one of the ambitions a teacher might have. Do you see yourself as
no, I don't.
Some form of teacher?
Had I not discovered that I had a writing talent, I might have become a teacher. But since this character doesn't have a creative talent, it's perhaps the best thing for him, the best way to unfold this passion for books, to become a teacher.
Were you always a professional writer? Did you have jobs on the side?
I had jobs on the side when I started because I became a father the same year that I published my first book. I had twin boys.
Okay.
And in a very short time, I realized that this was not going to work. That I would simply have to make some money. So I became a copywriter for an advertising agency. I worked freelance for this agency for almost 10 years. And this gave me this immense freedom that I could, because I discovered that I could do this easily. It wasn't very difficult. No. So I spent perhaps half the week, doing ridiculous ads, and the rest of the week I could write my experimental novels.
But as soon as you could quit, you quit.
Of course.
Okay.
Yes, of course. The moment I discovered that I could make a living from my writing, I quit the job. Yes.
And how did that feel to suddenly be a full-time writer and be your own man, just writing?
Well, it's a privilege to be able to do that because so many writers are not able to do it. So many writers have to make ends meet by doing all sorts of jobs, meaningful jobs or less meaningful jobs. So it's a great privilege to have readers and to be able to earn a living from your writing. But it's also knowing how fragile you are in terms of your social existence, because you never know if your new book will catch on, you never know if people will actually buy it. And it comes with the trade, this fragility, this sense of being quite vulnerable, that even if you're invited to become interviewed in a public library or to go on TV and talk about your book, you also know that there's this insecurity. Your future is never safe.
It's a meandering path between hope and disappointment. I don't know any writer who is not disappointed. But in your book, there is this sense of ambition. Your narrator dreams. He's not satisfied with regular middle-class existence, but he has this feeling that he should be satisfied. He says something like a little friendship, intimacy, human happiness, and there is this sense of regret that he's not satisfied.
That's a quotation as well, because that's from Thomas Mann. That's from Tonio Kröger, about this poet who dreams of just participating in ordinary life, just like his friends. And he's unable to do that. And he dreams of the way that just a little friendship, a little kindness would be enough, but it's not.
Is his regret sincere, or is he disingenuous? What's happening here?
What's happening is that he would love to participate fully. He would love to be able to commit himself completely, but he knows that there's something in him like a fault. And he even sees it, I think, as something that is a fault with him, that he's unable to commit himself totally, that he's unable to just, be part of everyday life. There's always part of him there's a part of him that's sticking out, and into his imagination, into his dreams, into the world of books and music, etc. And he has a hard time, making these things meet and come together.
It's a very artistic concern, and I was wondering, is it a temporary concern? Because I was reading your book, and suddenly I was reminded of a writer like Knausgaard, and he is a middle-class guy, and he's struggling against conformity. And suddenly I was struck with the idea, the struggle against conformity, against bourgeois values. Is that the only fight Western man has left? Is that what is also happening in your novel?
I think that he is feeling alone also with the observation that something is lacking. That he's part of a society which is richer than any other society has ever been. More privileged. More people have more privileges and more freedom and more possibilities than ever before. And yet, it's as if something is lacking. That's how he sees it. Something is lacking in terms of spirituality, in terms of contemplation, in terms of being able to not just, follow the lead and rush into the future with your projects, with your ambitions, with your craving for more success, more material goods, etc. And he's trying to. This is the notion that he's trying to bring forward to his students, to his pupils, that there is something else in life. Life can be different. And it's also what was a part of the time when he was young, because today we may ridicule the 70s for the naivety of the political radicalism, for the abortive illusions of utopia, etc. But there was one notion at the time which was extremely valuable and which I feel that we've lost. And that is the notion that life can be different. It doesn't have to be this way.
Does your character, did he say his goodbyes too early to his dreams, to his illusions?
But I'm not sure if I agree that he has said goodbye to his dreams. I think that he's discovered that he's alone with his dreams, but he hasn't taken leave of them, and he makes an important observation, and which has to do with his relationship with women. There's a passage in the novel where he has an argument with his wife before they're divorced, and the argument starts when they talk about a girl he knew when he was young, before he met his wife. A girl who tried to commit suicide, and he feels that he was to blame for that, and he's right. He was to blame for that.
He was, yes.
And since she's a psychologist, she tells him, that's an illusion, you have to accept yourself, and you didn't know what you were doing, and so on and so forth. And he protests against this psychological notion that you have to accept yourself. He says, no. That's not the meaning of my life, that I should accept myself. On the contrary, I do not accept myself. And the feeling of guilt is important for my notion of my own personal identity. But then the argument develops, and she reminds him of Stendhal. And he's surprised because he thought that she had never opened a book by Stendhal. But she quotes this essay that Stendhal wrote about love. And I don't know if you remember it or read it, but in this essay about love, Stendhal is a very cynical man, a very disillusioned man. And the story of his own life was that he fell in love constantly, and he was always very unlucky in his love affairs. So he had to write a book about it, like a real writer. And in this book, he develops the notion of crystallization, What he says is that if you go to Salzburg and you take a branch, a naked branch, and you lower the branch into the salt mine and leave it there for some time and take it out again, there will be salt crystals all over the branch, as if it were, a tree, a white tree, blooming with salt. And he makes the comparison that if you take the image of any woman, any pretty woman, and lower it into the deep recesses of a man's heart, and leave it there for some time, and take that image out again, then he's in love. And his idea is that being in love is a thing of the mind. It has nothing to do with the woman. It's all about you. Yeah. That's what the point Stendhal is trying to make, which is a cynical point. It's really saying that love is an illusion, that it is, imbuing any woman with the qualities you would like to see in her. They're not there. They're in your mind, and you don't know how to distinguish between your own illusions and the real person.
So is love an illusion?
No, because what my character answers is, Stendhal is wrong. There is truth in our capability of seeing beauty in others. There is truth in our capability of seeing people as being more than they may even think they are themselves. That's where he's a real romantic, probably. But this is something that he believes in, and this thought follows him until the very last page of the book, and that is why I don't think that he's that disillusioned. He's disillusioned in the sense that his experience tells him that love won't last. But he's not disillusioned in the sense that he believes that contact is possible and that something can happen between two people which make them grow and become more than they were before.
Yeah, one of the truly meaningful relationships the narrator has is right at the end with a woman. One of the few women in the books that he doesn't sleep with.
Exactly.
Is that deliberate? Is that?
It is, because it's the irony of this story that at the very end of the book, when he's approaching 60, he has many reasons to escape his 60 years birthday, and you will have to read the book to know why. But he does not feel like celebrating, so he leaves Copenhagen. He goes to Rome, where he spent a holiday many years ago with his former wife. And in Rome, he wanders around and he watches ruins and he contemplates the ruins of his own past. And he meets someone. He meets a young woman who happens to be a photographer. She's a young photographer who walks around with this old box camera on a tripod, and her work is about slowness. She's obsessed with the notion of making it difficult to take a picture and making it something very slow. And they start a strange kind of friendship, and there's a certain point where this could have developed into a love affair. And it's not the young girl who's making it impossible, because there's a moment when she's actually inviting him, and he decides that no, this will not happen. This is too late. I am too old. And he's surprising himself, because there's nothing in the times we live in, there's nothing in our culture, there's nothing in public morality that would tell him that he shouldn't go for it. No. On the contrary, everything in culture today is about permissiveness. It's about anything goes. Yeah. And everything is about sex. So again, he is someone who rebels against his own contemporary culture, in that he says, no, everything is not about sex, and no, I will not have an affair with this young woman because I feel that I am too old. But something else is happening, and what develops between them is a platonic moment. by way of this thing she has with photography. And this is a moment when he discovers that there is also truth in sublimation, and there is beauty in it, and there is a possibility of closeness and connecting that would not have been there had they slept together.
Yeah, it's one of the most touching and most intimate moments in the novel.
Yes.
So what does it say that once you sleep with each other, all intimacy is lost? Or what?
No, it doesn't say that. I mean, that would be generalizing. That's a wrong way of interpreting a book. But what it says is that sex is not always the ultimate way of connecting, because that is what we believe. I mean, there's a ridiculous and degrading notion in modern culture that sex is when you're really close. And anybody old enough will know that sex can be the loneliest thing in the world. and he knows that.
Yeah.
And what he discovers, and this is where he's not disillusioned, what he discovers is that there's this other way of becoming close, which is far more profound than anything that could have happened between them had they become a couple.
Yeah, I also got this sense that he's a better father than a lover.
I think so, yes. I think he is. I'm sure, I hope so. Yes.
Yeah. Questions, yes.
You've written some novels from a female perspective and also from male perspective, and I was wondering, this is a novel looking back on life, a melancholic journey, what I understand. Was it possible for you also to write this from a female perspective, and was it different from this?
I've done that earlier. I've written several novels with a female protagonist, and which are narratives told from a female perspective. And for me, there's no real difference. It's not more difficult for me to write from a woman's perspective than it is from a man's. For me, there's really no difference. And in a way, I'm curious to know why there should be a difference. It's as if there's an assumption that a man should find it more difficult to write about a woman than about a man. I think that this is what literature does. That once you get started, once your language, the language of fiction begins to warm up. It's much like, that when an artist works with clay, it has to attain a certain temperature before you can really begin to shape it. And that's what happens to language as well. As you work with it, it becomes more fluid. It starts to obey you and to follow your imagination. And what it also does is that it makes you discover language, makes you discover that you know more than you thought you did. I always loved the notion in Plato, the philosopher, that knowledge is about remembering, that when children are born, they are born with the full knowledge of the world of ideas, and then they forget. And teaching and learning is to do with remembering what you knew when you were born. If you sort of transfer that to the relationship with literary language that we have as writers and as readers, I think there's something reminiscent there, because I think that we know more than we think we do about one another. I think we've seen more, we've felt more than we allow ourselves to admit, because in our everyday existence we play our roles as men and as women. As men and women, we are taught to be persons, individuals in a specific manner. And much of the interaction between individuals has to do with playing out these roles. And in all relationships, there's also, at least quite often, a certain degree of power game going on. Emotionally, socially, And because of that, we have a hard time allowing ourselves to invest the full empathy of imagining the other. And I think that literature is about imagining the other. And that's what language allows us. And it does so by reminding us that you know more than you think. So when I write, I discover that I know very well what it's like to be a woman. Before, I didn't. And later on, when I closed the book, I forget it again. There's this Danish poet, she's dead now, she used to say that before I write, I know nothing at all. When I write, I know a little. When I've written the poem, I forget it again. But it's in the poem. And it's the same thing with literature, I feel. And as readers, it's the same thing. I'm also a reader, of course. And when I read, I feel that language also invites me to imagine things that I would otherwise be alien to. Because when we read and when we write, we don't use language in order to convince anyone or to persuade anyone or to prove anything. We're just exploring the possibilities of what it means to be human. So that's one answer to the question. Another answer would be more personal. A friend of my wife once said to me that I think the reason you write so well about women is that you've always been trying to understand your mother. And I think that there was a point in that. She surprised me when she said so, and I was thinking about it afterwards, and I thought, yes, I think it's true. I think I've had reasons for wanting to understand my mother and understand why she did the things she did to her life, and that's probably part of it as well.
By observing her, or not only maybe?
No, simply trying to empathize with the choices she made, which were painful to the family. Understand what drove her, what was her drive, and that has been an important thing for me in my own development, because I think it's important for everyone. It's a way to grow up, I think, that you are no longer. It's also a way of escaping the blame game between parents and children, that you actually begin to see your parents as the persons they were, the persons who were. I mean, today I think of my wife, my mother, when she was the age of my sons, who are now grown up. So you suddenly reverse the roles and you see your own parents in a different context, which is part of being an adult who no longer defines himself or herself as a victim of this or that in your childhood. So that's another reason again. And the third reason would be that throughout my youth, my early childhood and my youth, my adolescence, I never felt the gap between girls and boys. I always felt that it was easier and more interesting to talk with the girls than it was to play football with the boys. So from early on, I felt that there was no real, obstacle.
Could you have written this book, say, 20, 25 years ago?
No, definitely not.
What does it take to write such a book?
It takes 55 years to prepare for it.
Would you call it wisdom or just age, or?
I think I think that every age has its own wisdom. I think that's important. It's important to realize that children have a wisdom that we lose later on, and adolescents have a wisdom that we lose later on. And obviously, when you're older, you hope to have achieved some degree of knowledge about life. But I read something by Milan Kundera lately in an essay where he contemplates the phenomenon of age, and he writes that the most important thing when you try to understand a person is to understand that person's age, the age that this individual is living through. And I think it's true. In another novel of mine, I used a motto by the Polish writer Witold Gombrowicz, where he says that there should be two languages, really. One for those whose life is in the ascent, and another one for those whose life is in the descent.
Yeah. So
meaning that when you're young and you have your life in front of you, you need one language for that, and when you're on the other side of the middle, you should have a language for that. And literature tries to create that language, the language of the age as well, of your personal age. So when I was in my 20s and I wrote my first novels, I was a young person, and those novels are reflections of a young person's outlook on life, a young person's way to interpret where he was at the time. And when I look back on my books, which I do rarely because I'm not that interested in looking at my old work, but when I do, when I have occasion to do it, I can see, on the one hand, I can recognize it all, and I remember the person I was when I wrote that. But I also notice how, even if I keep returning to the same themes over and over again, they have changed because I changed. So there are ways of writing about desire that I wouldn't write today. And there are ways of describing tenderness, which I could only have written being older than I was at the time.
Where is the tipping point between ascent and descent? Because I'm 40 years old now. Am I still ascending, or is it time for me as a writer to start descending?
I think that issue is somehow balanced by something else, which has to do with the fact that any person is a work in progress, and identity is a progressive thing. I'm convinced that you're always becoming who you can be, and you never finish that. Meaning that you will not really be there to say who you are, because by the time that narrative will be possible, you'll be gone. Yeah. It's an open-ended story, and that is why even if once you reach your middle age, you might say that you're crossing a threshold. That doesn't mean that you're sort of looking at the exit. It just means that you're somewhere else in life, and I think it's part of being an adult, that you don't pretend to be younger than you are, that you accept your age, and while at the same time accepting the notion that you're still in the process of becoming.
Yeah, it's analogous to time. There never is a now.
True. Yes. Now is always disappearing.
In the past. I say not now. It's already in the past.
Yes.
Questions, or do we have time for questions? What time is it? Well, maybe one or two. Yeah. If there are any questions, of course.
Yeah. Why are you here together? Because that's what interests me is why you make the interview with. Was your idea? Was it your idea? What's
it was. I think it was a fortuitous plan to get us both on this couch this evening. I think we've both written a book about love, about remembrance, about dreams, and some form of disillusionment. I think it's always wise to have a writer interview another writer. You're on your book tour now, and hopefully I have asked a few questions that you haven't heard before. Hopefully, my English is okay. That's and it's. I think what I bring as a fellow writer is a different kind of curiosity. I'm interested in other stuff, and hopefully I have communicated my aims and my interests to you all this evening. And that's probably all that I can say about it. It wasn't you, it wasn't me, so it had to be a third party.
It's the organization, and we thought it would be interesting because both writers have similar interests, and they both write about love, about lust. They have both are extremely interested in literature, as you may have noticed, we thought and think, and I think we were. I hope you agree we were right in that they. This was a beautiful conversation, and they have touched upon extremely important themes tonight, and maybe this is also a good moment to thank both of you and to end this evening. But well, I hope the writers will be willing to sign books that are for sale in the venue. And before thanking you and ending the evening officially, I want to announce 2 new evenings that we will have here next week, Monday, is it 9th?
9th, yeah.
Yeah, of March. We'll have an interview of John Gray, the writer-philosopher, will be interviewed by Bas Heijnen. And the week later, Monday the 16th, there will be another evening about love, but love seen from a scientific. So it's not. There won't be writers, but scientists talking about love. Well, I hope to see you again there, but I really want to thank both of you, and please give a warm applause to Jens Christian Grøndahl and Gustaaf Peek.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was beautiful. Heel erg bedankt. Thank you. And thanks to Meulenhof, the publisher of Jens Christian Grøndahl, who brought him here. Thank you very much.